there, Ben and Lucci. Today, we are talking about the words commitment versus forecast. And the reason why we're bringing this up is because back in 2011, we removed the word commitment from the Scrum Guide and replaced it with forecast. And we're going to talk about what that means, what's the difference between those two words, and does it do more harm than good to say forecast versus commitment? So throwing it over to you guys, I still use the word commitment. I've never used the word forecast when I'm working with my team. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I'll jump in to start with. I mean, I'm not 100% sure. I mean, the Scrum.org have got an article about why it was done, and I'm not gonna. I don't actually know. I can't remember off the top of my head why they said or what the reasons they cited were. But I'm kind of actually for the removal of the term commitment and going back towards forecast. We talk a lot about old project management and people being asked to sign up to drop dead dates and like this scope in this amount of time with this amount of money, and that was a commitment. It was a contractual obligation between a development team and a project manager or a business person. And then under the banner of Agile and Scrum, we said, well, actually, we know that there's variability in our work. We know that estimations are just that, they're just estimations. Yet we still persisted with this idea of committing to a fixed scope and fixed time. So 2-week sprint, this amount of stories. Yes, I can commit to doing this amount of stories. At the same time, that's, I can do this. And then on the other hand, saying, but we know that there's variability in there and we know surprises can come up. So I guess it's around the kind of whether you really mean commitment, as in this will happen, or whether you're saying, I'll try my best to make this happen. I think probably the word forecast is a little bit more realistic to say, I forecast that this will happen, but I'm not committing to it happening.
It's funny. I understand the switch of guard of like the difference between the way project management would work versus the way we're trying to work in Agile, in that these are estimates. But I do have feelings about, instead of saying commitment, forecast, because I do feel like when we're saying commitment, the team feels some sort of responsibility in a way that at the end of the sprint, if things aren't done, it forces the conversation for why did we not meet the commitment, and then they keep getting better. Whereas forecast, I wonder if there's this like nuance difference that, oh well, we just didn't make it. And I know we have our retrospective still built in, but breaking a commitment feels like, ooh, we have to talk about what happened. Whereas forecast is like, well, the weather didn't rain like it said it would, and it's a different feeling to it. And I like being held accountable to things that I commit to. And if people don't hold me to them, why am I even there? I don't know. I feel like I get what you're saying, Ben, but I feel like commitment has like this gravity to it. Like we make commitments in relationships, friendships, and outside, like it feels like bonding. I don't know.
Yeah, that was my take on it. Forecast just seems wishy-washy. It's like, oh, we're gonna forecast that this is gonna happen, and we'll just hope for the best. Hopefully, it'll all be good. But if it's not, it's okay.
I think we've got to remember like where the most of these people, and I'm not saying a commitment is a bad thing. A commitment to turning up to work and doing my best work is a great thing, and I can commit to my team that I will turn up to work and I'll work as hard as I can, and I expect that same commitment from my teammates. But committing to a fixed scope of work sounds a little bit like project management of old school. And overlay with that, the proportion of teams who still work in an environment where a commitment is a contract and a sword dangling above their head. In an ideal world, commitment would be like high fives. What are we going to do today, Scrum team? Let's kind of do some rapid prototyping on paper, and then we'll work with our product owner and we'll ship something at the end of the week. Awesome. What proportion of teams are working in that manner? And I think probably the original intent is commitment. Yes, awesome. Commitment, we'll try our best to get it done. We'll move heaven and earth to get it done. But knowing that a lot of teams don't necessarily work in that environment, and they work with this residual project management, either culture or fear kind of built in, I think maybe commitment is probably more damaging than galvanizing, if you like.
Ben, I have a question. How do you kind of guarantee, even though we don't know what's going to happen, when you forecast that things are going to be accomplished? And what role does accountability play there?
Yeah, I think it's a it's a really difficult one, because are we managing by trust or kind of accountability? And I say that, like, it wouldn't, like, the work is the work, and if everyone worked as hard as they could, then the amount of work that got done is the amount of work that would have got done regardless. Like, it doesn't matter whether the accountability was there or not, or the commitment was there or not. We just worked 100%. We delivered what we could in that time because we learned stuff as we went along. In a forecast, we're essentially just changing the word. We use the same mechanisms. We use velocity and we use story points. We're just changing the word from commitment to forecast. Now, why would we do that? I imagine because someone said, you have committed to this, you need to get it done, and we've shifted it to being probably more in favor of the team, where the team say, well, we didn't commit to this, we forecast we could do this, and we've learned something new, such that forecast for me is much more in line with the word estimate, whereas commitment is in line with definite and certainty. And so for me, it's just the same mechanisms, the same way about we do our work. We're just shifting that one word from being a commitment, which is certain, to a forecast, which suggests to everyone who sees it that there is some variability in there.
There's, when you try to solve a mindset or a cultural problem with language, I like the rough edges around certain things because they reveal what's really there. When you look at what's going on and you say, well, there's this project manager that's holding people accountable because they didn't commit, or not necessarily holding them accountable, but beating them over the head with something where the natural variability of work has created a situation where the team could not have met the commitment, as opposed to saying, I've committed to this in an idealistic way with the understanding that no battle survives contact with the enemy, or however you want to call it. Kind of to Alana's point, there's energy around that. And it surfaces like, oh, look, this project manager is using this term the wrong way. I don't know how much changing the word improves the lives of the team members. While it might be technically more accurate, it feels like coming in 10 years later and like tinkering around with something in order to address a symptom of the problem rather than the root cause.
Yeah, Lear, I'm feeling that a lot. I feel like commitment has been misconstrued or kind of molded to fit the word deadline. And we don't like, that's not a fun word because we don't know what could happen, right? And I think I'm going to say it. If you're a leader watching this, it's your fault. Like it's because people are afraid of missing the deadlines or missing the commitment. And then people are afraid to speak up when they're going to miss their commitment. And now we have to change words because people are afraid of you. It's your fault. So I think if we led more with trust and we talk to the teams about what's realistic within understanding that the world's not perfect, like even in our relationships, we make commitments to each other, but we fail on those commitments. And when we fail on those commitments, we talk to each other about it. If I'm going to be late to meet my friend, which sometimes I am, like, we're going to be like, hey, sorry, like this happened. And also I'm going to try to work on not being late in the future. Like I think, to Lear's point, changing a word isn't going to change the dynamic. And I think it's the fear that is a problem. Like,
I disagree. I still disagree, because changing a word could make a big difference. If you said to your friend, I'll be there at 8-ish, it means something very different to I'll be there at 8. And just adding ish adds in a sense of chance of variability, such that everyone can manage their lives. Everyone intuitively understands what that means. It means probably not at 8, probably sometime around 8. And by saying forecast and not commitment, we're saying probably about this amount of work, but we can't guarantee this amount of work. And I think it just shifts. It's a very powerful thing. And it shifts the conversation. Even if you read it, like no one spoke these words and it says the sprint forecast is this versus the sprint commitment is this, someone without any context of the people involved will have a very different understanding Now, do we lose something by moving from commitment to forecast? The dynamic which you guys have discussed around kind of moving heaven and earth and galvanizing the team and doing great things, I think we do. I think that we lose that in a very small proportion of teams. And what we gain for a lot of teams is acknowledgement of the variability. So not being held to a commitment. So I think it's, yes, absolutely, the dynamics agree. I just think it's more important that we give 90% of teams a break, and the other 10% who would have galvanized around the word commitment will probably still continue to do so because they're in the environment that allows them to do that.
That makes sense, Ben. I hope if anyone, a developer at Jira or Rally or any software development tool that helps track our work, can add ish to the end of every story estimate. So it's like 5-ish points, it's 2-ish points, and our velocity is 30-ish. Would make people probably a lot more relaxed.
If you look in Jira, like if you look at the sprint velocity report or the sprint, it says committed and achieved. It says it there, like there's the committed amount and you didn't meet it. Your achievement was below your committed.
Committed versus actual. The metric is called committed versus actual.
Yeah.
So that
could be forecast versus actual.
Yeah, the word it hasn't made it in. It hasn't made it into the lexicon or to the tooling yet.
I agree. Yep.
12 years.
Maybe it's because people know how often forecast isn't right, and so they're just like, "Oh, that's just way too accurate for use it for the weather. We don't know what's going to happen."
I always like to make sure our viewers can take something useful from these conversations and not just kind of theoretical debates. So my top tip is to start to use ish, as Alana said. So it's 5-ish points. Remember that a 5-point story is bigger than a 3-point story and smaller than an 8-point story, right? It doesn't mean it's actually 5 points. It means it's somewhere in the middle there. People kind of dismiss that and they add 5 and 5 and say, well, that should be 10. Well, actually, it's not really. So use ish to kind of give yourself some wiggle room and start to use forecast, like write forecast down and not commitment. So when these reports get filed off to a project manager who's adding up story points all over the place to create deadlines, and at least now you've said, well, this was my best estimate at that point in time. So use ish would be my tip. Anyone else with tips for this?
I like ish.
Cool.
Ben stole he like put it perfectly. So it's the ish concept. I love it. This has been so great. Thank you for those of you who joined, for those of you watching. Thanks for tuning in, and love to hear from you in the comments below. Let us know what you think of our new ish concept and how you are doing where you are. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks everyone. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We've got more videos.